In 2025, Steven Tyler turned 77, and at his Rock Hall induction, an unexpected event occurred. Fans were shocked to see him without his customary stage makeup. Even devoted fans were taken aback by the deep lines that covered his brow. However, that wasn't the most unsettling aspect. Recent images reveal a completely different picture. Doctors claim that his tumultuous history is the reason why his hands shake now. The man who used to scream for hours on end on stage can hardly speak. You won't believe what actually happened to the rock legend's face. On March 26, 1948, Stephen Victor Tellerico was born at Manhattan's Stayson Polyclinic Hospital, which had housed generations of New Yorkers before closing in 1978. Victor, his father, was a high school music teacher and a pianist with classical training. Susan, his mother, stayed at home and proudly displayed her Polish heritage. Strict regulations and piano notes permeated their flat constantly. Despite being surrounded by noise, Stephen felt as though his family was trying to squeeze him into a little space. The only thing that felt cozy and alive was music. However, he also secretly disagreed with it because he desired independence and his parents wanted discipline. Long before he ever set foot on an actual stage, that tension was ingrained in his body. His family relocated to the Bronx when he was 3 years old in the hopes that things would improve. Rather, the local children undermined his self-esteem. He had curly hair, was thin, and walked strangely. Bronx lads in the 1950s didn't tolerate that. They pulled him away from their groups, shoved him, and taunted him. There was a sting to every school day. He defended himself by acting out, and before long, he was confronting teachers just as much as bullies. Home wasn't the solace he sought either, since Stephen felt he could only breathe when he snuck outdoors due to his father's stringent practice regulations. By the time he was 6, he had discovered a peculiar type of tranquility in neighborhood parks where doo-wop groups performed under streetlights. He imagined himself standing in front of people who genuinely wanted to hear him as he listened. The family relocated to 100 Pembroke Drive in Northeast Yonkers in 1957, when Stephen was 9 years old. The bustle of the metropolis gave way to the quieter buzz of the suburbs. However, Stephen's thoughts continued to get louder. At the age of 8, he found drums and made a kit out of cardboard boxes and pots. He would sneak Elvis Presley albums into his room at night and mimic every gesture, shaking, and shout in the hopes that no one would catch him. In private, Stephen spun Elvis while his father played Beethoven in the living room. The performer he would become, someone who could growl, scream, whisper, and soar all in one song, was born out of that silent struggle between classical and rock. Stephen discovered a secret no child forgets when he was 10 years old. In the 1920s, his grandpa had operated an illicit alcohol business and eluded the government as a bootlegger. Stephen thought it was fantastic. He felt as though he was born with a spirit of defiance. Something clicked in his head when he realized that someone in his own family had once broken the law. Perhaps he could break the mold if his grandfather could. The tales turned into gasoline. He wore them as a badge and went on to harness that same wild attitude to push his music to new heights. He was struck hard and early by asthma. He was confined indoors for days, struggling to breathe and hearing his own lungs fail him. He laid in bed and dreamed of brilliant lights and people while other children rushed outdoors. Every daydream set him free, yet every attack held him captive. In his dreams, he became bigger, louder, and untouchable. He became the showman he is now because of those lonely hours. His leaps and cries on stage were more than just show. They were paths of escape created during childhood illness. His asthma persisted, but he discovered a way to transform weakness into a form of fire. Stephen used all of that pent-up energy to form a band named The Strangers by the time he was 14 years old, in 1962. Soon after, they changed their name to Chain Reaction, and Stephen started out as the drummer. He let out a scream that sounded exactly like Little Richard at a disorganized garage jam session in 1964. After giving him a startled look, the band shoved him forward. Everything changed in that instant. He had already opened for bands like the Beach Boys and the Byrds at the age of 16. Long before it became his signature, he wrapped scarves around himself and donned platform shoes. Teachers were not fond of it. His inappropriate actions resulted in his suspension. However, Stephen was unconcerned. Every defiant stride he took brought him closer to the enormous object he was after. He transferred to Manhattan's Quintano School for Young Professionals after being expelled from Roosevelt High School in 1966 for using marijuana. He sold handcrafted leather products and buskied on the streets to pay for it. His life became into a blend of hustle, music, and late-night gatherings where drugs were simple to obtain and even simpler to consume. Stephen had already chosen the loud route, despite his father's desire for him to pursue classical music. His voice, writing, and attitude all reflected the wild spirit of the 1960s counterculture, which Quintano introduced him to. He met Tom Hamilton when he visited a New Hampshire ski resort in 1967, a year later. They spent the entire night jamming and bonding over Jimi Hendrix. That session was the initial spark of Aerosmith, although no one realized it at the time. Although Stephen was well known in the neighborhood clubs, he needed Hamilton's help. Their chemistry was immediate, vibrant, and ravenous. Something that could shake the walls seemed to be beginning. By 1968, every young guy was worried about the draft for the Vietnam War. Stephen hid in band vans, slipped into anti-war demonstrations, eluded police, and just avoided being arrested. A system that attempted to confine him was rejected by him. A few of his buddies were enlisted and never returned home. Because of his drug usage and rebellious nature, which caused him to step outside of the bounds of acceptable behavior, Stephen avoided it. His resistance to submit, bend, or break was formed by that experience and carried into Aerosmith. He started performing in Boston clubs with Chain Reaction by 1969. The throng went shirtless and plunged into anarchy that startled spectators and occasionally erupted into riots. Despite his bandmates' incessant arguments, the audience was unable to turn away. His training ground was the Boston scene, where he developed the wild force that would eventually blow up stadia. Then came July 31, 1970. Aerosmith began when Steven Tyler moved to Boston's Fenway District to join Joe Perry, Ray Tabino, Tom Hamilton, and Joey Kramer. Stephen got the name from a comic book he had read and a dream he had while high during rehearsal. They lived on instant noodles, slept wherever they could, and practiced in cramped flats and basements. Everywhere he looked, Stephen faced rejection, but he clung to his goal. On November 6, 1970, they performed live for the first time at Nipmuc Regional High School in Upton, Massachusetts. There were just about 200 children present. Because they were only paid $50, Stephen performed Mama Kin and closed the evening by destroying Joey Kramer's drum gear. Police intervened after the altercation spilled into the parking lot. However, news got out. It was difficult to forget a band that crazy. They were signed by Columbia Records for around $125,000 in June 1972 after Danny Goldberg saw their wild performance at Lenny's on the Turnpike. The air was heavy with smoke. Stephen stood like he ruled the world in the center of the boisterous gathering. Aerosmith finally had their chance after Columbia took a chance. The 1971 and 1972 initial trips were difficult. They had little money, no beds, and a psychedelic painted van with which they went. They subsisted on inexpensive food and took showers at truck stops. On one occasion, poor hot dogs even caused Stephen to throw up on stage. However, the band continued as the audience shouted. Their narrative was built from the ground up as the van transformed into a moving house full of stress, laughter, and perspiration. Stephen and Joe Perry were at odds about lyrics and control by the end of 1972. Before they went to Sunaip, New Hampshire, they were on the verge of breaking up. They assured one another that they would wait together, drank, partied, and returned together. Brad Whitford took Ray Tabano's position shortly after he was fired for being unreliable. The band was concerned that Stephen had already started using heroin, but Whitford's constant presence helped them stay focused. Between late 1972 and early 1973, they recorded their first album at Boston's Intermedia Studios. The label was alarmed by Stephen's unpolished vocals on Mama Kin, but the band was ecstatic. They held on to every erratic yell. The record was released in January 1973. It was little at first, but it raised their flag. The sound that would propel Aerosmith from the basement to the pinnacle of rock history was shaped by the mayhem, the hunger, the conflicts, and the dreams. It was in 1974 that Steven Tyler entered the New York record plant with a youthful voice and an older-than-life passion. There was not much time left for the band to complete Get Your Wings. Lord of the Thighs was the final object, and Jack Douglas gave Tyler the hardest shove he had ever received. For 12 hours in a row, Tyler stood there stacking his voice over and over again, overdubbing harmonies until it seemed like something was tearing inside of him. Blood was running down his throat at the end of the night. They needed that last sound, though, so he continued. Aerosmith's sound was eternally altered by those rich, bluesy layers. The record quickly turned into their first significant step toward stardom. However, it was also the first indication that Tyler's physique might not survive rock and roll. Since 1969, when it was just a piano demo he performed for himself, Drayamon had been a part of Tyler's world. It didn't take off until 1975, when a re-release propelled it to the 6th spot. All radio stations wanted a piece of it all of a sudden. But there was a catch to that attentiveness. The stations were unable to handle Tyler's profanity when he conducted candid interviews in Boston. Up until a few stations banned him, he called censors prudes and made fun of their regulations. Fans' passion for the song only grew as a result of the bans. Dream On turned into the song that made Tyler seem like he was destined for revolt and made Aerosmith unavoidable. Aerosmith was already going crazy by the time the California Jam came along in 1975. Tyler felt the rush as 250,000 people gathered in front of them at the Ontario Motor Speedway. He sprang 20 feet into the air as if he couldn't fall, rushed across the stage, and climbed high on the drum riser. He broke his heel when he struck the ground incorrectly. He continued to sing, nevertheless. Pain was irrelevant. The cameras continued to roll. More people screamed. Talk of raucous parties made backstage stories even more bizarre. However, the jump itself remained in the annals of history. It demonstrated just how far Tyler would go to appease the crowd. Later that year, there were toys in the attic. A 20-minute riff that Tyler and Joe Perry slapped together like lightning gave rise to the song and Walk This Way. Without paper and without patience, Tyler scribbled the lyrics on the stairway walls of the record facility. In order to stay awake during the confusion, he continued to snort cocaine from the mixing board. Years later, Jack Douglas acknowledged that the studio turned into a place where nobody slept and everyone strived for some sort of edge. Although those behaviors were risky, the outcome permanently altered music. Rap, rock, and everything in between were all impacted by Walk This Way. Additionally, Aerosmith gained international recognition thanks to the album. Detroit received the Unexpected Show in 1976. On stage, Tyler proposed to a girl he saw in the crowd. While the audience yelled for the show, chaos broke out backstage. Fans said it resembled a battle from a movie when his girlfriend, B.E.B. Buell, rushed the stage and accosted him. Everywhere, it made headlines. Even though Aerosmith had a reputation for being troubled, this incident demonstrated how complicated Tyler's personal life had gotten. When the Rocks arrived in 1976, they thrashed back in the saddle with a crisp whip crack. However, that sound was difficult. First, they attempted to use an actual bullship. It was unsuccessful. It did more harm than good. After failing for hours, they finally managed to crack it by snapping a cap pistol and spinning a 30-foot rope. Although the album peaked at number 3, the band was losing ground. At gigs, Tyler's voice slurred. Fans were perplexed and occasionally irate. Even success couldn't conceal the fact that drugs were becoming so prevalent. The Rolling Stones tour of 1977 followed. Tyler and MC Jagger stood side by side in Baton Rouge, belting out Brown Sugar as if the stage were theirs. Newspapers adored it. But behind the scenes, Tyler used drugs with Jagger and almost overdosed on heroin. He was glowing in the lights 1 minute. He was fading out backstage the next moment. It was an omen of things to come. After ingesting heroin, Tyler passed out in the studio during the Draw the Line recordings in 1977. For weeks, they were forced to cease recording. The approximate cost of the delays was $200,000. His addiction controlled the room despite the producer's best efforts to encourage him to sing honestly. There were rumors that the band might not even make it. Then, in 1979, an odd event put an end to everything for a while. Alyssa, the wife of Joe Perry, showered Terry, the wife of Tom Hamilton, with milk backstage in West Hollywood. The fight quickly escalated as Tyler lost his temper and attacked Perry. Perry resigned a few hours later. The band disintegrated. That one moment had been the culmination of years of ego, drugs, and chaos. Tyler overdosed on methadone in Portland, Maine, on July 9, a year later. Before being taken to the hospital, he required CPR after collapsing into the drum set in the middle of the performance. An entire tour had to be cancelled by the band. It was the most obvious indication yet that something needed to change, yet change was difficult. Jimmy Crespo took over and contributed to the creation of Rock in a Hard Place in 1982 after Perry left. Tyler was hardly present. His vocals were flat and exhausted, and he was high on Percoat when he did. At number 37, the album reached its lowest point since its release. It sounded like a band disintegrating, according to critics. They weren't mistaken. The band ultimately made an attempt to save him in 1983. They persuaded Tyler to check himself into rehab when they met him at Café La Fortuna. He concurred. He stayed at Hazelden for 30 days. He experienced discomfort and hallucinations from detox. He was still detached from the group, but he emerged more clearly. It was difficult to wipe up the wounds from the past. He overdosed once more a year later. In a hotel room with booze and Valium. He was revived by paramedics. He attended his first AA meeting because of that fear. The road remained hard, but it was a step. When discussions regarding Perry's return started in 1985, things nearly turned around. Then, during rehearsals, Tyler relapsed once more. After the reunion broke up, Tyler started working on little projects, such as a 1986 appearance in Rogue's Gallery. It was necessary to reshoot his mumbled lines. The years seemed to be lost. During these years, Tyler's personal life was very complicated. He briefly had an affair with Baby Buell in 1976. On July 1, 1977, she became pregnant and gave birth to Liv Tyler. She named Todd Rundgren as the father because she was afraid of Tyler's way of life. It wasn't until a DNA test in 1991 that Liv found out the truth. She was 14. Despite the intense shock, she finally became close to her biological father. Serinda Fox and Tyler were married on September 1, 1978. On December 22, 1978, their daughter Mia was born. Drug use, extramarital affairs, and frequent travel caused the marriage to fall apart. In 1987, they got divorced. Serinda suffered in the ensuing years and died in 2002. Mia's father was absent throughout her childhood. The darkest chapter in Tyler's history began in 1973 when he began dating 16-year-old Julia Holcomb. He was appointed as her legal guardian, and the lawsuit that surfaced decades later revealed a horrific tale of trauma, drugs, and manipulation. Tyler referred to his errors as crimes of passion. However, the world witnessed something much more alarming. In 1988, he married Teresa Barak following his divorce from Serinda. In 1989 and 1991, Chelsea and Taj, their children, were born. The couple separated in 2005 and then divorced in 2006 as a result of Tyler's addictions. He was able to face some of his past when he became engaged to Erin Brady in 2011. When she found old love letters from the 1970s, their relationship ended in 2013. Tyler said that he felt ashamed of the person he had been. Amy Preston, who began as his assistant, became his love interest years later. In 2016, they went public. Despite the fact that she was 38 years younger, their relationship evolved as a result of their shared struggles and recovery work. Then something was different. Aerosmith surged once more when Tyler cleaned up. They published Permanent Vacation in August of 1987. The album sold over 4 million copies, and the song Dude Looks Like a Lady peaked at number 17. The band appeared everywhere at once. Tyler was creative, sober, and desperate to take back his life. They were ranked as America's top hard rock band by Rolling Stone in 1989. Pump released Janie's Got a Gun that same year. On one tune, Tyler layered his vocals almost 50 times. He received his first Grammy after it peaked at number 4. In the US, the album sold more than 7 million copies. Aerosmith stood in front of about 1 million people in Moscow in 1990. While everyone watched, the Tyler crowd surfed and gave Soviet guards peace gestures. It turned into one of the most bizarre performances of the time. Get a Grip was released in 1993 and sold more than 20 million copies globally. Cryin' grew enormous. During the music video production, Tyler damaged 3 ribs when he leaped off a cliff. But he persisted till the end of the filming. Then came 2 Grammys. The band had risen back to the summit. Their Ballpark Brawl tour brought about $35 million in 1994. Backstage in Detroit, Tyler experienced a brief relapse, but he quickly recovered and resumed his sobriety. Their return was confirmed by the tour. When 9 Lives debuted in 1997, it nearly failed, but Pink rescued the day. The album peaked at number 1 and sold over 6 million copies, and Tyler rode an elephant in the music video. The song was dedicated to his father, who died in 2001. The song that rocked the world then appeared. I Don't Want to Miss Anything that peaked at number 1 in 1998 and remained there for 4 weeks in a row. It helped the Armageddon soundtrack sell over 11 million copies worldwide and sold over 1 million copies in its first month. It became a worldwide classic due to Tyler's passionate performance. In July 1986, Steven Tyler entered the Magic Ventures studio in New York with the expectation that it would be simply another session. However, something changed the instant he and Run DMC entered that room. Like a single heartbeat, they recorded the updated version of Walk This Way while standing in the same spot. At the time, rock and rap seldom ever interacted, so it was odd. And yet here they were fusing the raw edge of hip-hop with the 1975 Aerosmith smash. The remix went to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 when it was released. Aerosmith's weekly album sales increased from about 2,000 to over 10,000. Rap rock immediately became a powerful force after MTV repeatedly aired the video. Bands like Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit later passed through the door that was opened for the world that day in the studio. Steven was in a very different spotlight years later. He became a judge on American Idol in 2011, and the salary was substantial. $8 to $10 million a season, roughly. The screen was illuminated by his colorful personality. The tabloids had a field day after he planted a kiss on Pia Tosano's cheek. He claimed that the show forced him to travel 250,000 miles, which exhausted him and caused him to quit after season 12. Jennifer Lopez made $17.5 million a season, about twice his salary, which infuriated his squad. The stress was also sensed by his bandmates. They thought he was drawn away from Aerosmith by the TV life. Keith Urban took over after he departed the show, and Steven returned to his full-time career in music. He had already let the world into his life long before any of that. Does the Noise in My Head bother you? Is his memoir from 2006? Readers were startled when it came in at number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list. He discussed the turmoil of the 1970s and acknowledged that he spent $20 million on drugs. He wrote about fights, parties, rehabilitation, and the harm he inflicted without really acknowledging the suffering that went along with it. The most disturbing part was when he disclosed that he had attempted suicide in 1986 after taking 30 pills before being rescued by his fiancée. The book was a success because of the unvarnished nature of his tales, which demonstrated that he could captivate readers with words just as well as with music. His little acting performances were memorable. He played a roadie version of himself while holding a harmonica in Wayne's World 2, 1993. He even ridiculed his aged reflection in the mirror when he appeared in Be Cool in 2005. These brief appearances provided brief glimpses into his charm and sense of humor. He never pursued acting, although he made an impression whenever he appeared. His attention turned to something more profound as he grew older. After reflecting on the suffering behind his song Janie's Got a Gun, he founded Janie's Fund in 2015. By 2025, the charity had raised $25 million and provided 525 abused girls with 66,000 therapy days. It sought to assist around 4,000 girls annually and operated in 12 states as well as Washington, D.C. He spent time with the girls himself and launched a new center in 2021. The project demonstrated how personal his purpose was and grew to become one of the most influential celebrity charities in youth recovery. However, life put him to the test once more. He took a move into the Nashville scene with the publication of his solo album, We're All Somebody from Somewhere, in 2021. The album peaked at number 1 on the top country albums chart, and he collaborated with Carrie Underwood among others. In its first week, 16 to 800 pure copies were sold. Songs like Red, White, and You felt bold while holding on conveyed fragments of his unwavering fortitude. The record, which was released during a relapse scare, had the candor of a guy who has repeatedly been on the verge of collapse yet continued to move on. In 2009, that edge became apparent when he had surgery on both feet to treat severe bunions brought on by years of wearing tight boots and performing crazy stunts on stage. It was rare and very unpleasant to do both feet at once. He was put on OxyContin by doctors, but the discomfort caused him to relapse into addiction. In December 2009, after almost a decade of abstinence, he checked himself into the Betty Ford Center after developing a prescription drug addiction. Despite having to postpone their tour, Aerosmith returned in time for the 2010 Grammy Awards. He warned followers of the potency and dangers of drugs by being candid about the relapse. He encountered another problem just as everything appeared to be stable. He suffered a shattered shoulder, a deep cut on his head that required 20 stitches, and a lacerated liver after crashing his motorcycle in Maui on August 5, 2011. He underwent 8 procedures. But weeks later, he joked about his rock and roll bones while wearing a sling on his arm as he took the stage at the 2011 VMAs, and then he sang a little portion of Dream On. His determination to remain motionless demonstrated how much performance meant to him, even though the crash resulted in additional tour cancellations. Then, in 2023, the bombshell arrived. When Steven pushed too hard in the first few seconds of Aerosmith's September 9 Peace Out farewell tour, he broke his larynx. He staggered on stage due to bleeding from the wound. He took months to heal, according to doctors, and may never fully recover. The remainder of the tour was rescheduled. His voice had propelled the band for over 50 years, leaving fans in a state of shock. The injury demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful vocalist. He made every effort to do better in 2024. Injections of stem cells in Nashville and Utah gave people hope, but not assurance. Doctors concluded the damage was irreversible by August. After more than 50 years of touring, Aerosmith announced their retirement. Although terrible, it was unavoidable. When they made the announcement, an entire era of classic rock appeared to bow its head. He continued to find opportunities to offer music even after that. He made an appearance at the Jam for Janie charity event in Los Angeles in February 2025. He hadn't performed since the injury. Among the 3 songs he sang were Dream On and Walk This Way. The audience stood and applauded despite his gruff voice and sore neck. The bruises spoke for itself, and the doctors cautioned him against pushing himself. Still, he threw everything he had left into the chamber. He sang Mama I'm Coming Home with Joe Perry at a memorial to Ozzy Osbourne at the 2025 VMAs later that year. He hardly moved to keep his throat safe. The audience was moved by the performance, which received another standing ovation. He was taken to the hospital immediately after leaving the stage due to vocal strain. The homage demonstrated his continued power despite his limitations and the rising expense of performing. He put much more money into Janie's fund after quitting touring. He used the $10 million he saved from the tour to create an endowment and launch a new girls' center in Tennessee in 2025. Every year, the institution provided support, residential care, and therapy to hundreds of girls. It evolved into a living representation of how he transformed his personal suffering into something therapeutic. Fans started discussing his aging when all of this was going on. His features caught the eye at the 2025 Rock Hall induction. Although he claimed to have only used eye creams in 2007, deep forehead wrinkles revealed significant Botox use during the 2010s. Debates concerning cosmetic surgery, genetics, and the effects of decades of driving were sparked by side-by-side images taken in the 2000s and later. Some admirers even conjectured that his early heroin use gave him a strangely youthful, smooth appearance that vanished as time passed. His visage came to represent the complexity of aging for rock stars. Amy Preston, his partner, posted pictures of him at home on Instagram in 2025. Fans saw tremors in his hands, which many thought were remnants of his previous drug usage. He did yoga nearly every day despite the tremors. In his 60s, he discovered yoga, which kept him muscular and flexible. Images captured him jamming with friends, cooking, and laughing at events. Even though he was 77 years old, he still had that spark. People were reminded of his battles by the vibrations. However, he felt like a survivor in action because of his dedication to health. For once, the public saw the man behind the legend still alive, still learning, still clinging to whatever music remained inside of him. His home life appeared to be peaceful and genuine.